Last night, I was invited back to my college alma mater, University of Nebraska, Kearney. That's where I went before going to the seminary. They asked me to be an alumni speaker for their UNK Newman Center banquet that they have each year. So in getting ready for that talk, it's caused me to reflect back on some of the ways that I grew, especially during that time when I was in college. And one of the big influences upon me in growing in the faith was actually a lot of my Protestant friends. They really challenged me about the faith. And I remember at one point writing a response to one of my friends explaining why, as Catholics, we use the crucifix. Because I'd been asked, why do we have that? They're used to just the plain cross, and we have Jesus on the cross all over the place. Do we think that Jesus is still crucified? Don't we know that he's been raised from the dead? Or don't we believe that he actually rose? And being so used to images like the crucifix, having Jesus upon the cross, it was a bit strange of a question for me. Because, of course, we all believe Jesus rose from the dead, right? Of course, we don't think that he's still there on the cross. And that's certainly not what we're saying when we place the crucifix in our churches and in our homes. Our response could really be that his death and his resurrection are so intertwined with each other that we really can't show one without the other, without proclaiming that they're both true. And in a sense, that's exactly the way it is for Jesus himself. After Jesus rises from the dead, he begins to appear to his disciples, and we just listened to one of those accounts in the gospel tonight. And in their fearful state, they're at first terrified at the sight of him, wondering if he's just a ghost. They didn't quite understand yet that he had risen from the dead. And then Jesus assures them, he says, "Why are your hearts troubled, and why do you have questions? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see." So in this moment, to prove that it is himself, he shows them the wounds in his hands and in his side, where he was pierced by the lance. Because this is how he knew that they would recognize him. That the one who had been crucified was now the one risen in glory. He had risen, if he'd risen from the dead, but without any of the signs of his passion, then his disciples might have continued to doubt that it was actually the same Jesus. But his proof, his argument was now that the body that he was showing to them, glorified, was the exact same body that was firstborn of the Virgin Mary, the same body that was nailed to the cross, the same one that was placed in the tomb. But now this body had properties of which it did not have before. And it was not that Jesus kept his wounds in his glorified body to remind us of just how cruel human beings can be. No. But rather that it was through the sorrow and the pain of the cross that redemption was won by him. The nail prints, the pierced side, those were the unmistakable scars of the battle against sin and evil. Even a soldier today might look at the wounds that he or she receives upon the battlefield not as a disfigurement, but as a trophy of honor. And so that's more like the way our Lord would see them as well. He wears his wounds proudly because it proves that love is stronger than death. And it makes me actually think of some lines from one of Shakespeare's plays, Henry V. That play dramatizes the Battle of Agincourt, part of the 100 Years' War. And as part of that, King Henry of England, he has to try to rally his troops against a much vastly larger and superior army of the French. And so there's a famous speech called the St. Crispin Day's speech, in which he's trying to rouse them into battle. Just a little bit of lines from that. It says, "This day is called the feast of St. Crispin. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors and say, 'Tomorrow is St. Crispin's day.' And then he will strip his sleeve and he'll show his scars and say, 'These wounds I had on St. Crispin's day.' Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day." So in the gospel today, Jesus himself is showing his scars to his disciples. And when we see his scars, when we see the crucifix, we are reminded of the feats that Jesus did that day. And even when we make images of Jesus portraying, the resurrection, we continue to place his wounds, the image of his wounds there. For example, from last week in Divine Mercy Sunday, the Divine Mercy image has the rays of light coming forth from Jesus' pierced side. The image of Jesus of the Sacred Heart, we see his heart exposed from his wounded side as a sign of love for us. We have a king who has led us full charge into battle against the enemy, against the darkness of sin and death, and he has come through it victorious for us. If his scars had been removed after the resurrection, if we were to get rid of the crucifix, we might forget his sacrifice. We might forget that earthly struggle can be transformed into heavenly glory. And when you seem to be facing incalculable odds, when your resolve to follow Christ seems to waver, when you're feeling discouraged beyond hope, look upon his wounds. Jesus says, "Why are you troubled? And why do questions arise within your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself." Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus Christ, crucified and risen. He has carried his wounds into heavenly glory. And know that for us too, we who are with him, when we're in heavenly glory, can in a sense strip our sleeves and show our scars that we gained during this earthly time on earth, in that fight against evil each day. In the midst of all of our struggles and earthly battles, we need to know that we have a king who is leading us, one who did not shrink from the fight, but carried with him into glory this great sign of his love. His wounds are not those of weakness, but glorious scars of victory.